Morning. Risk of collision, Rule 7, comes in four main parts. The first part says, every vessel shall use all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions to determine if risk of collision exists. If there is any doubt, such risk shall deem to exist. Then it goes on and it says, proper use should be used of radar equipment if fitted and operational, including long-range scanning to obtain early warning and risk of collision, and radar plotting or equivalent systematic observation of detected objects. Assumptions shall not be made on the basis of scanty information, and especially scanty radar information. It goes on and says, in determining if risk of collision exists, the following conditions shall be among those taken into account. Such risk shall be deemed to exist if the compass bearing of an approaching vessel does not appreciably change. However, such risk may sometimes exist even when the appreciable bearing change is evident, particularly when approaching a large vessel or a tug and tow when approaching a vessel at close range. Let's look at what we're talking about here. What it says in rules 12, 14, 15 and 18, it talks about there requires one vessel to keep out of the way of another when a risk of collision exists. When one of two vessels in sight of one another is required to keep out of the way of the other must maintain her course and speed, as in Rule 17. The question arises is how far apart must those vessels be when risk of collision shall be considered? For instance, it may well be that it may be at 12-14 miles we would see a steady bearing. Does that mean that I have to maintain my course and speed until that vessel passes? No. It's talking about using common sense and applying that rule to the circumstances of the case as it's referred to in Rule 2. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that if the vessel is a bit closer, then if the vessel is coming in this sort of area here, this may be 6 miles away, 8 miles away, then it can be seen that the two were going to interact together. And in this particular case, this vessel over here under Rule 15 is the stand-on vessel. This vessel here is the give way. She would take action, a broad alteration of course to starboard, and then pass round her stern, passing well clear. Continue to monitor until finally passed and clear. Okay, so what it does say is that we should take a systematic observation, whether that be by radar or whether that be visual. We can take transits, we can take a radar, acquire it on ARPA, and so after the 3 minutes the information will be generated on the screen, giving us course, speed, CPA, TCPA aspect. Visually, we might well take a series of compass bearings to ascertain whether there's a risk of collision or a close quarter situation. Either way, then I must not rely on scanty information. Hence why I was talking about the 3 minutes if I'm using ARPA, and at the same time if I'm using the visual bearings, then I need to take it over a period of time. What does it mean in the latter section? There we're actually talking about saying that risk of collision shall deem to exist if the bearing does not appreciably change. But then it goes on with a caveat saying such risk may sometimes exist when the appreciable bearing change is evident, particularly with approaching large vessel. Here on this diagram what I've tried to show is 3, 6 and 9 miles and 12 miles. If this exaggeration was a change of 1 degree on the bearing, then it can be seen clearly that for about 3 miles then the vessel has moved only 2 cables, whereas at the long range here she might well have moved 1.5 miles. It might be interesting so it can be seen it can be seen quite clearly that although the bearing has changed the same distance, when it's much closer, then there may still will be a close quarter situation developing. And I'm sure you've seen that situation at sea. Let's have a look at see what also it says. It says that large vessels or tugs and tow. So if I have a large vessel here, let me just get you a large vessel. Should have done that earlier. Here we go. Here's a large vessel. If I had a large vessel, then I need to make sure that I'm actually taking a bearing at the bow and a bearing at the stern. If I bring that quite close, although this is out of scale, it becomes clearly seen. Whereas the further I move it away, then this becomes a much smaller target. It also talks about a tug and tow. And the situation may well be that the bearing of this particular tug is that it's closing, and the bearing of this tow is opening. What might that mean? It would mean that this is going to cross my bow, and this one is going to pass astern. If we follow it down, then you can see that I am actually aiming straight for the tow rope. Not a pleasant situation. So a broad alteration of course to starboard so as to pass round the stern will be the best action here. Best action here. Stop.